Welcome everybody to the Art of Powerful Presentations. I'm so glad that you can be with us here today. Very briefly, I'm your host, Melissa Vollmer, the founder and creator of pedallove.org, where I create storytelling, communications, and yes, media tools and coachings and trainings to help you grow active, mindful mobility in a much more sustainable world. This webinar is part of my ongoing series for the online course, Becoming a Storytelling Superhero. And if you're not a part of that course yet and would like more details, I share those with you at the end of this presentation. So this presentation is just about 20 minutes long of my presentation, and then at least 10 minutes for your questions at the end. And I'm asking everybody that you take a moment as you come in to go ahead and mute yourself, because we are recording it, so I can share the recording with you afterwards. And if you're not muted, we can pick up some awkward sounds in the background. So go ahead and mute yourself, and then at the end, I'll have you unmute yourself so that we can have your live questions. Also, if you think of questions that you want to ask me as we go along, I'm not going to stop for them, but what I do ask is that you either write them down or you go ahead and you text them to me in the chat box here so that you don't forget, because they are going to be excellent questions. As we start today, I want you to think about the people, the teachers, the presenters, the motivational speakers who have really rocked your world, who have really helped you see the world differently, and who helped start you on the path perhaps to do the work you're doing or inspired you in other ways. And I want you to think about how these people made you feel. I'm going to start today with a very short story about the impact that this man, Dr. Leo Buscaglia, who passed away in the late 90s, but he was a teacher and a motivational speaker that I was first introduced to when I was a senior in high school. So I was a senior in high school in 1982, way back, and I was failing my gifted program English class. And it was the class that I had always excelled at, unlike math. And I was heartbroken and absolutely mortified. In order to not fail the class, I was being transferred into a regular class, and I was so embarrassed. Yes, I wore the title of being smart and gifted like an honor badge. And so it was really a super big blow to my ego. But on that very last day of the gifted program class, my teacher had us watch a video. And the video starred Dr. Leo Buscaglia, who was then a professor at USC and had just written a very well-received book called Love. It was a special on public television. It was one of their fundraising goals. And as I sat there, he began to speak about how important it was for teachers and educators to avoid trying to be too smart in what they taught people, hitting the information over their students' heads, trying to squeeze results out of kids and others who didn't have the particular years of study in that subject that the teacher had. Wow, I felt like he was speaking directly to me. That's exactly what was happening to me in this gifted class. It was a different teacher than we'd had the first 3 years of high school. And instead of reading an entire book, she was now having us read excerpts from things like Moby Dick, a chapter or less. And then we were expected to understand deeply the metaphors and meaning of the book, and I didn't. I was super literal, and it wasn't until years later that I realized I didn't at this time really understand what a metaphor was. Leo Buscaglia taught from the heart, and I left that class feeling so much better about myself and less of a failure because of his words, and words like those I've got on the screen in front of you. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today's webinar, it's that making a shift away from trying to prove how smart you are, and instead to recognize the power of connecting with people emotionally, will absolutely transform your presentations. This is something that the late poet and author Dr. Maya Angelou summed up so beautifully with this quote: People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. This is especially true for those of us that are working on deep, long-term projects where we really want to transform transportation, mobility, sustainability. We've got to connect with people emotionally if we want to overcome things like our very toxic car culture. So, what I want to do today, one of my big goals, is to help move you from overwhelm to feeling inspired in the approach to your presentations. Because when you move to creating from emotions, things actually get much easier. And of course, my overall goal is to help you create presentations that will really resonate with your audience and create people that are not only eager to see you present, but want much more from you. And I think you're on the same page with me that that's what you would like to see happen too. So the first thing we're going to talk about, the first tip we're going to focus on is approach. And the radical idea here is that approach is as important as content. Now, this is something that I learned from the nonprofit organization Toastmasters International, but I was powerfully reminded of it again from Amy Cuddy's TED Talk in 2010, Your Body Language May Shape Who You Are. It's one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Presence. The theme of that talk was that by how you stand, how you sit, your posture, how you move, can affect how you feel about yourself. It flipped so much of what we thought on our head that literally by changing how you stand, you can change how you feel about yourself. So that's what I mean by approach. But approach is also how you put together the look and feel of your presentations and then how you perform it. So it's not just your PowerPoint or your Prezi or other type of tool or the report you're reporting from. It's also the language you choose, how you speak, your pacing, your tone, how you stand, of course, per Amy, how you gesture, and yes, how you dress. Because today, in our modern era of video, our talks and presentations can have an extremely long life, and you want videos of you giving presentations to be one of your best sales tools. So here's one of the big secrets I want to share with you. Your PowerPoint isn't your presentation. You are. You want to think of your tools of your presentation as your musical score. It accompanies you and it uplifts you, but you are the star. But you're not the hero of your presentation. Your audience is. You're not the Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, you're the Yoda. You're not the Harry Potter, you're the Dumbledore. And this is something that I learned from master presentation coach Nancy Duarte of Duarte Communications. Take this to heart and it will so shift your presentations that your audience will definitely feel the difference. Ask yourself, before you even start to put a presentation together, how do you want to feel when you're giving the presentation? And how do you want the audience to feel? How do you want to feel? I would imagine confident, strong, charismatic, bold. And your audience, I would imagine you want them to feel inspired, curious, eager for more, ready to take the next steps. Then, once you know the emotions, you want to set the framework of your style or your style guide for your approach. This is the template that you create to give your presentations a consistent and polished look and feel. Nothing is more jarring to people than PowerPoint presentations that were cobbled together at the last minute of a bunch of different slides from a bunch of different styles. It just doesn't look good. Style guides can be for any kind of communication, but we're going to talk about presentations today. So here's just a few things that you can do right away to make sure that you're putting together a great look. You want to make sure that your color scheme complements your company logo if it doesn't match it. You want to use only 2 easy-to-use font styles and in only 2 different colors. Don't use fonts under 36 points. Even in webinars like this one, everything is 36 points or greater so that people can read it. Radically limit the amount of text you put on each one of your slides as well. Only put 1 clear image per slide, and this is very important if you want to become a well-known presenter. Put the title and your name on your presentations, like I've done here, because people might borrow your presentation and then cut it up to use in their presentation, and you want them to remember where they got the very useful information that you're sharing with them. Now, next, you want to have a clear through line in your presentations. This is your why of your presentation, your touchstone that you should come back to a few times throughout your presentation. I recommend 3 times if you can. This is how you're going to paint the big picture before delving into the details. And this is an idea that I picked up from best-selling author and speaking coach Carmine Gallo of The Storyteller's Secret. So this is really how you're going to tell people the journey that you're going to go on emotionally with them before you start, so they can have an idea of the destination you want to get to with them throughout, and help them understand where you want to arrive at even better. My personal through line for this presentation is to help you emotionally transform your presentations to create more inspired audiences. This is the shape of compelling presentations. So we talked about the approach, we talked about the emotional through line that helps people on the journey and make it really clear on where you want to go with them. But now we're going to talk about how you really make your presentations compelling and memorable. And you do that with this shape. This shape was researched and discovered by, again, Nancy Duarte of Duarte Communications. And she found out in her research that she shared in her TEDx talk from 2010, which again, I do share with you also at the end of this, and I highly recommend you watch, that the most memorable speeches of all time had this shape. That shape. These are the talks of people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream from the March on Washington, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first presidential inauguration speech, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and even Steve Jobs' iPhone launch. What the most compelling speakers and presenters do is lay out a very clear case of what they want the audience to understand about the possible bright new future they're envisioning. Again, this is kind of the concept of your through line, but then they compare and contrast it with what's going on now. In Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s case, this was a dream of a safe, integrated future for people of all races, with African Americans finally being granted their fair share of rights, versus what was actually going on now, a check they couldn't cash. And as you're laying out this shape and you're comparing and contrasting, you use stories to illuminate the data and statistics that you want to share. You share your own personal story with a mix of other stories as well. And you make them very, very short to slip them in so that you have time to give stories of more people and give a better, well-rounded approach to things. So data is important. You need data, but people don't remember data. They're not inspired by it. Rather, they're inspired by the stories that illuminate the data. So how do you do this? You can tell stories like the one I did at the beginning of the presentation and that I'm going to do throughout. And yes, you can tell stories in under 3 minutes. Beth Noble, the executive director of Sand Creek Greenway in Denver, Colorado, is here with us today, and she had a great question for me ahead of time. How do you keep your presentations from being the me show when you share your own personal stories? So let's look again at the shape of presentations. And you can see that there are places where you want to illuminate data, that you want to slip stories in. So here's what I recommend. Whenever possible, you share stories in triplicate. You share one story of yourself personally that really illuminates the point that you want to make and shares maybe where you had an aha moment to see the world differently because of this point that you're making. But you pair that with either stories of colleagues of yours or most especially the people that you serve that are very different from you. So your audience sees that you're taking a very, very diverse approach. So let me give you an example with the story. So here's how you go. Sorry about that. I missed this. You layer the stories in, story. And now let me give you an example with a story. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been coaching Renee Moore, the bicycle program manager for Bike Arlington, for her talk that she was giving on equity in bike rides at a regional conference last Friday. I recommended that for every tip about creating true equity that Renee shared with the audience, she share a story that reflected exactly what she was talking about. Now, in Renee's case, she is so successful at creating great rides that everybody wants to go on that we just had to kind of pare down and go through and just find the one. She had about 5 points in her story, and so she had a story for each one, and we just had to figure out which story was the best. But what I recommended that she do is start with her own story to illuminate the need never to assume who wants to ride a bike based on their age, race, background, or who already knows how, because that's a big barrier for a lot of people. They never were taught how to ride, and so many of us in biking and walking advocacy assume that they were. Renee, who is now a very knowledgeable league certified cycling instructor with the League of American Bicyclists, didn't learn how to ride a bike until she was well into her 20s. She actually asked someone to teach her how to ride a bike on a first date. What a great story. And I am very proud to report to you that she got gold stars for her presentations, and you will be seeing a lot more from her. She is a brilliant and inspiring presenter. If you're still not sure what the heck a story is or how to tell a great story, I am going to be giving a live webinar next week, Storytelling 101, and I will share with you more tomorrow the details about that. And I hope that you'll join me, or you'll share this with others of your colleagues if they need some help as well. In closing today, I want to share with you that less is more. Humans really can't pay attention for more than about 20 minutes at a time. This is what the TED Talk team found out when they did their homework. And that's why their presentations last 8 to 18 minutes long, and why I radically changed how I do webinars and other coaching sessions. And these presentations, I only talk for about 20 minutes and often less, and give you more time for questions. Less is more. When you leave people with time for questions, they feel like they are a part of your presentation. Again, remember, they are the heroes of this. And my goal today is to help you shift from thinking that you're the hero of your presentation to letting your audience be the heroes. And by making this emotional shift, you will create more inspired audiences. Okay, now I'm ready for your questions, and I'm hoping you got some good ones for me today. So go ahead and unmute yourselves take a minute to unmute yourselves. And I'd love to hear if you guys have any questions or anything you want me to clarify that I haven't made clear for you today.
Hi, Melissa. This is Tony Carfang.
Hey, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad I was able to actually make time and join for the live webinar.
Good, me too. And greetings from
yeah.
Oklahoma. So this is exciting. We have people from all over the country. Thank you.
Excellent. So one detailed question. How might the rule regarding why 3 times with regard to stories potentially be modified depending on the length or the format of the presentation? Specifically, I've got a couple of presentations that might be a little bit more technically focused for like an hour, and there might be like a Pechakucha talk that I've got coming up that's only a 5 or 6 minute presentation, for instance.
Yes. So I would say when you're giving an hour-long presentation and you're dealing with a lot of data, you still want to put stories in there because, and this is what Nancy Duarte says, don't give your report, don't present your report. Give a presentation and hand the report out. So you want to make sure, and this is the thing about being smart, is even though you might be presenting to other bike advocates or people that are urban planners or whatever, you assume they are swimming in information as easily as you are, and people just aren't. No matter how smart they are, they're going to get overwhelmed. So I highly recommend that for every major data point that you want to share, you have a story that illuminates something. Now, it doesn't always have to be a hero's journey, happy ending story. It might be a story that's actually sad. It might be the loss of a life, which I believe you've had recently. So you want to demonstrate how it really, somebody died because of this, or somebody was gravely injured because of this. You want to share that story and humanize it whenever possible. So especially when you're giving longer presentations, you want to make sure that you're leading with those stories and then the data backs it up, rather than we have data and then we're just going to throw up a picture of John Smith. Oh yeah, and he died. And does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And here's the point that I want to make, that you're going to get pushback from the data wonks for this approach, but you have to ask yourself and your board of directors and your people in your organization, are we serving the people who are already riding bikes at the level of competence that we find good and appreciate, or do we want to serve everybody who might want to ride a bike, and do we want to actually advocate for biking for anybody of any age? And this is a challenge that biking, walking, transit, other advocates have been in, because it can be a real cool club and people in the real cool club can want to keep it lean and mean. That's not going to get us where we want to go for the planet or for humanity not getting drowned by global warming, right? So for
Indeed.
Right? Does that make sense? Have I answered that fully?
Yeah. Thank you.
And you can, I'd say in a Pechakucha where you're going to be really quick, maybe you just use one story, and you might not use your own story if you're there to really represent your organization and your own personal story doesn't really hit it, but there's a child or somebody else that whose story really illuminates what you're talking about. But when you're giving longer presentations, I'd really try to at least have 3 stories to bring diversity in.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah, did we answer all of the questions for you? And Beth, anybody else have a question that we want to?
Yeah, Melissa, this is Sarah. I actually have a kind of off the wall question, but I recently gave an internal presentation that was more trying to communicate like best practices for a specifically related to marketing and business development. And I wanted to be sure that I was giving context and examples by storytelling, but I found it hard to, one, either remember like the really good stories, because so much happens in a day and a week and a month that it just seems like another day and I don't remember those key stories to share. So my first question, I guess, would be like, how do you capture stories over time? Like, what's the best practice for making sure that you don't lose these good examples to reuse in presentations?
It's really a wonderful question, and I'm really glad that you asked that. One of the big things to do is to make sure that you get your team on board, your executive team on board, to create a storytelling culture. And that way, what you can do is you can have storytelling boxes. It's because people might be shy and they might feel silly to share and tell you at a coffee break or another place that a story. So they might slip a story into on a note card or a sticky pad or something and slip it into a box, or about somebody else where they want to be anonymous, but they know that there's a great story and that they want you to ask somebody about to tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that when you're doing internal communications, like an email newsletter that you might be doing internally, or even a print piece, you can say to people, you can set up like a Google Doc or a file somehow that's the best way for you to have stuff, and say that you want people to regularly share their stories or send pictures to be reminded for you to ask them about their stories. And you can use prompts, and you can say, well, this week I'm looking for stories about how children began to radically improve the amount of biking and walking they did to school because of a Safe Routes to School project, or the other kind of project that we put into play, or something like that. And you just slowly start to reach out to people, and they just go, oh no, Sarah's going to want this story. Sarah's going to want this story. I have to send, and you have to, I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes you have to play cheerleader and editor and drag the stories out of people. The reason that people get in the media and they become great storytellers and presenters are because they submit their work. Mm-hmm. And the reason why we don't have enough women as keynote speakers in our kind of work is because they're not putting their names forward as often as men are. So in some cases, you're just going to have to pass people by and remind them. You're going to have to send them a note, pass them in the hallway, whatever, and say, you know, I heard a rumor that you have a really great story. Will you let me hear it? The third and the final thing is, and this is for everybody, because everybody here should be collecting stories. You're probably going to have to call people, or you're going to have to sit down with them, and you're going to have to ask them questions, and you're going to have to record it. What I found is that a lot of people just do not like to write. They might be good technical writers, but they don't feel like they're interesting, and they don't know where to start. But if you ask them questions, they'll be happy to answer them for you. And you can record them on something like this or another on your cell phone or whatever it is, and you can get some really wonderful stories that way. Does that make sense? So we're just about up for today on our time. And I love the questions that you guys had. You can also email me any questions that you think of later. Does anybody have any questions that they want to wrap us up with today?
Maybe just quickly.
Yeah.
Have you found a particular style of story that may work better for addressing new riders or people who are interested versus talking to legislators about policy?
I'm the kind of story, and this is the one that we're going to cover next week. And if you go to my YouTube channel for Pedal Love, we also have some of these recordings. The kind of story that I think for both cases is the most important type of story to use is called the hero's journey. So there are 7 types of stories of all time. All stories fit in 7 categories of plot lines. 5 of them are called hero's journeys. And if you look at the most popular books and the most popular movies of all times, they're hero's journeys. So Shakespeare was hero's journeys. Harry Potter is hero's journeys. The comic book strip movies that are popular, they're hero's journeys. The Hunger Games are hero's journeys. And they're a very particular type of story that has a very particular type of formatting. And so to make your stories compelling to the largest audience, you choose the story that best reflects what you want to get across. And if you're going to meet with legislators, you want to choose well-rounded stories. And of course, you want to have stories of the old white men that had their world turned upside down by this, because you can never assume who can have a compelling story. When you're speaking to different audiences that are more diverse, you want to make sure that people in their stories, whether by their youth or their age or their background in some way, reflect the audience that you're trying to connect with. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know a lot of people don't understand what a story is, and that's why I'm sort of going through. So I've done a series of like four webinars, and now I'm going back to the original with the basics of storytelling, so that you will learn not only what a story is, but what a hero's journey story is, and exactly how to plot it. So not only if you're doing your own story, but anybody else's story, you can come away from that webinar and that information and teach it. And you can, like Sarah's going to be doing in the case where she cannot get people to write it down for her, Sarah, you're going to be able to plug it in and say, okay, this is a hero's journey story, and this is how I'm going to make it really interesting for everybody else.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa.
And it's not hard. This is not artsy fartsy. This is humanity. This is how human beings make sense of things. And I think one of the things I didn't say that I share with you as well at the end of this, so let me go here, and I will have this all to you guys, bits and pieces of it tomorrow, and then the rest of it you'll have next week, is I did a short 3-minute video called Why Stories Matter, because there were some great graphics out there about the science, the brain science behind why storytelling works so well over just data and statistics. And basically our brains can't remember data, but they can remember stories. So I created this very simple little video to kind of explain it. And I highly recommend you guys take a look at that. So I'll send you the links to that as well. And then basically we're going to be covering that next week. So if you have people that are really on the fence about storytelling, or you have people that you know would be great storytellers, if you could convince them that they needed to, please invite them to the webinar, because it'll be a great primer for them. And of course, all of you to be back with us again. So that's going to be it from me today, unless anybody has a final question, because I know your time is precious. So I want to send you off to your next adventures with a smile on your face and the less is more attitude, and not go on too long. But I do want to give you one final moment to ask me a last question, or are we good?
I think I'm good. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. It was lovely to have you here with us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, all good, Melissa. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm so glad you could be with me today. Beth, thank you for being with us today. And 713-835-9069, thank you for being with us today. It did not tell me what your name was, but I so appreciate it. I look forward to having you all with us again soon. Thank you so much.